when the research activity or when the research population is too broad, then personal interview method is highly difficult. After studying the respondents, only the interviewer will select the questions, so that the method allows to gather as much information as possible by the interviewer from the respondents. Of course, it all depends upon the interviewer, how he is going to prepare the question, for whom the question has to be distributed. So, who are the respondents? Hello everyone, I am Harshita, lecturer, Department of Commerce, Vidhyaashram First Grade College, the Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. My dear students, today we are in the second session of the subject, that is Business Research Method, and the unit is Unit 3, Data Collection. So already we have discussed few of the concepts in your first session. That is, we were discussing about what is this data, how the data has to be collected under research. So let us quickly recall what we have discussed in a previous session. So in a previous session, I have covered this topic, that is, we were discussing about data collection. So where we had a brief introduction about data collection. Of course, when a researcher wants to solve a particular problem, what he has to do? He has to collect the data. Now, from where he will collect the data, that we are going to learn under this particular unit. That is, data collection and its introduction. That is, what are the various types of data, what are the sources of data, and how the data has to be collected. Under that, we have learned about methods of data collection, where we have two important methods, that is primary data collection and secondary data collection. Now, what is this primary data collection? So, we had already discussed in a previous session. So, primary data means what? The data which is collected for the first time. Here, the researcher will not get the data from the earlier records. So, he has to collect for the first time in order to solve a particular problem. That is known as what? Primary data. Next, we have learned about secondary data. So, what do you mean by secondary data? It is opposite to primary data. Here, the data will be already there and the researcher is going to collect from that. That is known as secondary data, whereas primary data is called as fresh data, or it is a raw data where the researcher is going to collect for the first time. Whereas secondary data, it's already there and the researcher is going to collect that. So, that is about primary and secondary data. Next, what are the sources of primary data collection? Under that, we have seen a chart where we have two important methods to collect the primary data. That is, one is observation method, other one is communication method. So, in a previous session, we have learnt about observation method. Now, what do you mean by observation method? Here, the researcher will collect the data for the first time by observing each and every activities of the respondents. Under that, we have learnt about audit method, recording method, and behavioral studies. So, these are the three types of observation method. And next method is communication method, which we are going today, or which we are going to learn today about this second method, that is communication method. So, let us quickly begin the session. So, now what is this communication method? So, under observation method, here the researcher, what he will do? He will simply observe each and every activities of the respondent, then he is going to collect the data. But under communication method, there will be a communication between the respondents as well as the researcher. So, that's why it is called as communication method. Let us see what are the various types of communication method, what are its advantages, what are its disadvantages. Everything we are going to learn under this particular session. Now, what do you mean by communication method? So, communication method are considered as a most influential media. So, it is one of the most influential media to collect the required information or data from the respondents. So, it is one of the important primary sources of collecting the data, and it is also one of the most influential method to collect the primary data in the research activity. This method are used to take new decision from the data that are already documented or the answers obtained from the respondents. Now, Here the researcher is going to communicate with the respondents and collect the information, and that information will be helpful for the solving of research problem. So this is about communication method. Now let us see what are the various methods which are included under communication media. So here under primary sources of data, we are having two methods. One is observation method and communication method. And observation method we had already discussed in a previous session. So by observing they are going to collect the data. But under communication method, here the researcher is going to communicate with the respondent and collect the data. So under communication method also there are various types. Let us see in today's session. So the first method is that personal interview method. So you might be familiar about this method, and it is one of the most popular method to collect the data under research. So here face-to-face communication or face-to-face communicating with the target respondent is called as personal interview. Now what do you mean by personal interview? Here the researcher is going to contact the respondent and sitting face to face or through face to face communication he is going to collect the data or information. The interviewer contact the respondents, ask questions to them and obtain their feedback or answers. Now what the researcher is going to do? He is going to contact the respondents. For example, if we take students are the respondent, then the researcher will contact the students personally, face to face. He will ask questions and the students will answer the questions to the researcher. In that way, he is going to collect the information. He carefully records the answers in a notebook or in a pad which is meant for the purpose. So what is going to do? Whenever he is going to ask the question to the respondent, whatever the answer which is given by the respondent, which will be immediately recorded in a notebook or in a pad which is meant for the research purpose. The interviews are arranged at those places where the respondents are present. Now, for example, if they want to or if the researcher wants to conduct the research activity from the tribes, what they will do? They will directly enter the forest and they will meet the tribes and collect the information. In the same way, if they want to collect the information from the students, so normally the students will be there in the schools or colleges. So, here the researcher will meet the students in a school and he will collect the information. So under personal interview, what the researcher will do? He will personally contact the respondents where they are located and they will collect the information. So let us see what are the advantages of personal interview. So we have already learned what is the meaning of personal interview. Let us see what are the few advantages of personal interview. So the first one is it helps to collect the first-hand information from the respondents. Now, so we are calling it as primary sources of collecting the data because here the researcher is going to meet the respondent for the first time because those data which is given by the respondent will not be published anywhere. So the first time the researcher is going to meet that respondent and collecting the data so that the researcher will get the first-hand information. So this will be the first advantage because other than going or other than referring any other information, here the researcher what he will do? He will directly contact the respondent and collect the first-hand information. Next one is it helps to collect the real and trustworthy information. Now why he gets real and trustworthy information? Because the researcher himself is going to meet the respondent. So here not any fake information cannot be collected here because he is personally going and he is collecting the information. So he will get what? Real and trustworthy information, not any fake information. Next one is the responses from the interview is encouraging. Now this type of interview plays a very important role, or this method of personal interview, that is the method of personal interview, plays a very important role. The main thing is because of their accuracy, because the researcher will directly contact the respondent and collect the information. So in the research field, this personal interview is most popular. Next one is it helps to obtain the current information. So here the respondents is going to ask personally. So whatever the information which is given by the respondent will be the current information. It is not that it is been published 5 years back. So it is a old information. Fresh information the researcher will get from the respondent. That is current information. It is not outdated information. Next one is, it helps to eliminate misunderstanding arise in the minds of respondents. So there will not be any misunderstanding between the researcher as well as respondent, because they are sitting face to face and they are answering the questions. So here there will not be any misunderstanding in the minds of respondents. Next one is, it ensure uniformity in the information obtained. Now what the researcher will do, suppose he is going to contact 100 students. So he will set a questions what that has to be asked to the 100 students, so that there will be uniformity. So here through this personal interview, the information what they are going to get. So it is uniform in nature. Next one is, it is simple and easy method to obtain the information. So as I have already told you, it is one of the simplest form to collect the information. Next one is, it helps to build personal relationship between the researcher as well as respondents. Of course, when they are going to sit face to face and collecting the information as well as providing the information, there occurs a relation, that is a good relationship between the researcher as well as respondents. So these are the few advantages of this personal interview method. Now coming to the disadvantages. Let us see what are the disadvantages of personal interview method. So the first one is, it is not suitable way to obtain information when the field of interview is broad. Now, so think an example here. Suppose a researcher wants to collect the information from 100 respondents. Then he can personally meet all the 100 respondents. Face to communication will happen and he'll collect the information. Suppose he wants to collect from 10 lakh respondents, then what may be the case? Personally he has to meet 10 lakh respondents. So when the research activity or when the research population is too broad, then personal interview method is highly difficult, because it requires huge amount of money. At the same time, lot of time is required to collect the information. So when the research activity is too broad, then personal interview method is not suitable. Next one is, personal interview can be difficult to set up. So it is very difficult to set up personal interview because it is not an easy task. Here the researcher has to prepare himself, what are the questions to be asked, who are the respondents, how the questions has to be asked, whether the respondents will answer all the questions to the researcher. So everything he has to decide in advance. Without a proper plan, he cannot go for personal interview. So it is not an easy task. So setting up of personal interview is a difficult task. Next one, it is difficult to obtain complete data in the timely manner. Now, suppose if a researcher wants to collect the data from the respondents on a particular time and the duration is too short, in that case, it is highly difficult because the researcher has to collect more number of respondents and the time duration is too short. In that case, it will be difficult for the researcher to collect in time, because they have to meet the respondents personally and ask the questions and collect the information. In such cases, it is difficult when the time duration is too short. Next one is, it is time consuming. Of course, we all know. So if you think of yourself, you are going to meet thousands of respondents. So it is a time consuming process. First, we have to identify where the respondents are, correct? And we have to reach them and we have to ask the questions. Suppose they are in a group, of course, we can get easily, but if they are scattered, if the respondents are scattered, then it is very difficult to collect the information. So it is a very time consuming process. Next one is, it is costlier means of collecting the data. Of course, it is an easy task. If you see the advantage, it is an easy task because the researcher will meet the respondents personally and ask the question, and the accuracy of the data will be very Correct. But in case here, it is costlier means, as I have told you, it is time consuming. At the same time, it is difficult for the researcher to meet each and every respondent. Thereby, it is a costlier one. Next disadvantage is that an untrained interviewer is not able to produce the good results. Now, in order to conduct the personal interview, the interviewer has to be well educated. He should have some knowledge about the topic. If we do not have, then how he is going to ask the questions? So, if you don't know how to frame the questions to be asked to the respondents, in that situation, if the interviewer is not trained well, then whole research activity will go waste. So, a well-trained interviewer has to be there under personal interview method. Next one is, respondents may not feel free to provide factual information. Even though it is a face-to-face communication, but there are certain respondents who does not want to reveal their personal things. In that situation, personal interview will be waste, because if they spend so much of time and so much of money in order to collect the information, but the respondents are not cooperating with them, then it will be a waste for the research activity. Now, we shall see what are the types of personal interview method. So, we have learnt about what are the types of communication method. Under that, we have learned the first method, that is personal interview method, and we have discussed all the advantages as well as disadvantages. Now, we shall see under personal interview method what are the various types. So, there are various types of personal interview method. They are, so the first one is structured direct interview, second one is unstructured and direct interview, third one is structured and indirect. So first one is structured and direct, second one is unstructured and direct, third one is structured and indirect, and the fourth one is unstructured and indirect interview. So these are the 4 types of personal interview method. We shall discuss one by one now. So the first one is structured direct interview. Now what do you mean by structured direct interview? So here we are going to take into consideration the researcher as well as the respondents. That is the interviewer as well as the respondents. Now before the interviewer meets the respondents under structured direct interview, what the interviewer will do, he will frame a set of questions, and same set of questions will be given to the respondents before he goes for interview. So the respondents will prepare for all that questions, and when the interviewer asks the questions, in the same order the respondents will answer. So it is called as structured direct interview. If you go through this explanation, you can clearly understand. So structured direct interview is a systematic interview method. So it is one of the most systematic interview method. In this method, the questionnaire will be prepared. So the interviewer will prepare the questions and formal questions are included in it. So in this type of method, only formal questions are included in it. Here the interviewer will prepare a set of questions and only formal questions are included in it. Next, questions will be arranged in series. So, questions will be in a same order. The interviewer will decide in advance what kind of persons to interview, how to ask the questions, the scope and format of the questions. Now, why it is called as structured? Because the interviewer will decide in advance what are the questions to be framed. At the same time, who are the respondents, how to ask the questions, and for whom to ask the question, everything he will decide in detail, that is in advance itself. In many cases, the questions asked during the interview are made to the respondents in advance. Now, what they are going to do under this system, whatever the questions the interviewer will ask the respondents, so it will be known to the respondent in advance itself, so that the respondents will be prepared for that question, and when the question is asked, they can easily answer all those questions to the interviewer. So, let us see what are the advantages of structured direct interview. So, the first one is the interviewer is prepared well in advance. As I have told you, he will prepare all the questions. At the same time, he knows who are the respondents, how to ask the question, for whom to ask the question. Everything he will be prepared himself in advance. So therefore, he keeps his attention on questions. So he will give more importance on questions what is going to prepare. There shall be no abstract or unwanted questions. So unwanted questions will not be there because he will take lot of time to prepare that question itself. So this will be the advantage. Second one, this method yields creditable results. Now why it is creditable results? Because all the questions will be known to the respondents in advance, and whenever the interviewer asks the questions, without any time delay, they are going to answer all the questions which is asked by the interviewer. Next one is, this method allows to gather as much details as possible from the respondents. So here, after studying the respondents, only the interviewer will select the questions, so that the method allows to gather as much information as possible by the interviewer from the respondents. Next one, this method saves time. So it saves time of both interviewer as well as respondents. So why that of interviewer? Because he will know what the answers is going to be given by the respondents. For the respondents will be prepared in advance itself. So there will be no confusion or there will be no delay between the interviewer as well as respondents, because the questions are communicated between interviewer as well as respondents. So this method saves the time of both the interviewer and the respondents, since it is systematically arranged. Now why it is called as structured direct interview? All the questions are direct questions and it is structured in a proper manner, or it is structured in a systematic manner. So it is called as structured direct interview. Now coming to the next point, this method is quite good when the respondents are VIPs. So this method is suitable for the VIPs because they will not have sufficient time to answer all the questions. Suppose the questions are given in advance, they will prepare the answers for those questions in advance itself. So this method is suitable for those persons who do not have sufficient time to spend with the interviewer. Next one is, there is no scope for interruptions during the interview process. So it goes on simultaneously, because here the interviewer gives the question, at the same time respondents will know the question and they will be prepared for that question. So the answers will be given in a simultaneously. So there will be no delay. Next one, the results of the process is always believable since the questions are sent to the respondents in advance. So they will be well prepared. Here the respondents will be well prepared with the questions and they will give the exact answers to those questions. So they will prepare for themselves. For example, how you prepare for your examination. Suppose I give the same question paper, you will be well prepared for your exam. Right? So when you receive the question paper in your exam hall, you will not get confused. Right? So you know the answers, you know the questions in advance itself and you have already prepared for that. So you will keep on writing your answers. In the same way, it is called as what? Structured direct interview. Now coming to the limitations, let us see what are the limitations under this method. So the first one is, the interview material is pre-communicated so that there is no opportunity to extend the interview. Now what does it mean? Here I have told you, the researcher will set a group of questions and that will be given to the respondents in advance. Now what happens here? Respondents are not able to answer the question which is not there in the questionnaire, correct? So in that set of questions, they will be prepared only for that questions. So extra answers, or in the view of interviewer, extra questions cannot be asked to the respondents, because the respondents will not know the question. At the same time, even the interviewer cannot expect extra answers from the respondents. Under this method, we cannot extend the interview because questions are limited and the answers which is prepared by the respondent is also limited. So extra questions cannot be added here. Next one is, since the respondents have prepared the answers, it is therefore their responses are not spontaneous. Now what happens here? The respondents knows all the questions, at the same time they are prepared in advance. So thereby, if the researcher asks any extra question, they cannot answer spontaneously. So it is already prepared. Next one is, it is the responsibility of the interviewer to organize the interview in a systematic manner. So it has to be arranged in a systematic manner because it has to be decided in advance itself. So it has to be arranged in a systematic manner. If the interviewer is incompetent and inactive, the objective may not produce good results. Of course, it all depends upon the interviewer, how he is going to prepare the question, for whom the question has to be distributed. So, who are the respondents? So, it always depends upon the interviewer who prepares the questions. Next one is, the interviewer has to consider the answers received from the respondents even though if they are not clear or vague, because this questionnaire is in a structured format. So, whatever may be the answers, whatever the answer which is given by the respondents, so it has to be taken by the researcher because it is a structured direct interview, because it is already decided in advance and the respondents are prepared in advance. So, whatever the answer, so it may be correct or wrong. So, whatever the answers which is given by the respondents, so it has to be accepted by the researcher. So, this is about structured direct interview. Hope you have understood here. So, what you have to remember here, under structured direct interview, the interviewer has to have more skill. He will prepare a set of questions which will be communicated to the respondents also, where the respondents will be prepared with the answers to those questions. And on the date of interview, whatever the questions which is asked by the interviewer, so here the respondents will answer all those questions. And only those questions should be asked which are there in that question list. Not any other questions will be asked. Next, the second type is unstructured and direct interview. Now, what do you mean by this? So, they are going to ask the direct questions, but here the questions are not set in advance. So, it is called as unstructured. So, structured questions gives only limited answers. So, I have told you whatever the questions which are there in the hands of interviewer, only that questions will be asked. No extra questions has to be asked to the respondents under structured direct interview. With that limitation, here the researcher will not be able to get the extra answers or extra information. For such limitation, so this unstructured and direct method is applied. So, structured questions gives only limited answers. Many times they contain short answers like yes or no questions. So, you will have only two options. Many times you will have only two options, that is yes or no under structured direct interview. However, many times in marketing research, the short answers are not applicable because we want to know why it is yes and why it is no. We want to know why the respondents have selected yes answer and why the respondents have selected no answer, because we want to know the reason under marketing research. So, however, many times in marketing research, the short answers are not considered. The researcher wants to know the reason for yes or no. So, under structure, they are going to just have a confined questions where the answers will be either yes or no most of the times. But this cannot be applicable under marketing research because we want to know what is the reason for yes and what is the reason for no. In such situations, researcher asks direct questions to the respondents to obtain elaborate answer from the respondents. But instead of stopping in yes or no answer, here under unstructured and direct interview, the interviewer wants to know the cause. So, he wants to explore the answer. He tells the respondents to give the reason for the answers. Instead of contacting the respondents with a definite number of questions, the researcher is asked as many number of questions to obtain as much response as possible. So, under this unstructured method, what the researcher will do, instead of stopping with yes or no, he will ask the questions till he gets satisfied. So he can ask as many number of questions as he wants till he gets the correct answer. So this opportunity is provided only under unstructured but direct interview method. But they are going to ask the questions directly, not indirectly. So it will not be in a structured format, but until the researcher gets the answer, he will ask all the direct questions to the respondents. In this method, the researcher does not submit questions before interview and the respondents have no preparations to answer the questions. So under structure, what they will do, the interviewer will give the questions to the respondents in advance. But this will not happen under unstructured direct interview. The questions will not be known to the respondents. In the same way, respondents will also not be prepared for the questions. The researcher or the interviewer directly contact the respondents and instant answers are obtained for questions. Now here, since they are not prepared in advance for the questions, so the researcher will get all the instant answers. For example, a company has manufactured soft drinks and marketed it. If it desires to collect the opinion from the respondents, it will directly meet the consumer and receives the feedback as well as the answers. Feedback by asking as many questions as it feels necessary. Now here, suppose a company is manufacturing soft drinks and it is being distributed to the respondents. So in order to know their taste and preference, or in order to know the feedback from the consumers, here what the researcher will do, researcher will directly contact them and ask the feedback from the respondents or from the consumers. Such interviews will be arranged in exploratory research and the interviews will help to understand the problem clearly. Now, what do you mean by exploratory research? Here, a research problem is being explored. So, they wanted to know the reason why it is like that. So, that is known as what? Unstructured direct interview. Now coming to the advantages of this type, that is advantages of unstructured and direct interview. So the first one is it helps to collect as much information as possible on the subject matter of the interview. So here no direct questions. So direct questions will be asked, but the questions are not confined to the respondent. So as many questions as the researcher wants, he can ask all the direct questions. So here we are not going to get only limited information. So as much information we want, we can collect from the respondents. Next one is it helps the marketing managers to take appropriate decisions on the feedback received from the target group. Now what happens here? So basically if we are going to take about the marketing research, then there we want to know the reason for yes or no. So in that situation, it helps the marketing managers to take the appropriate decision based on the feedback which is given by the respondents. Next one is it enables the interviewer to observe the behavior of the respondents, and on the basis of this, the interviewer will draw the conclusions. So what he will do? So he will see the behavior of the consumers. So he will see the behavior and attitude of the consumers or respondents, and on the basis of that, he will draw the conclusion. Next one is it is economical, simple and direct, as it removes the possibility of waste of time of both the researcher as well as the respondents. So it is also one of the economical method where all the direct questions will be asked to the respondents. At the same time, in this method we will get the sufficient information. So it is more economical and it is a simple method and direct, and it is removes the possibility of wastage of time by both the researcher as well as the respondents. Now coming to the disadvantages of unstructured and direct interview. So the first one is the interviewer must be careful and intelligent as it involves in-depth interview. Now why it is called as in-depth interview? Because the researcher, until he gets the answer, he will dig all the answers from the respondents. So he will ask the questions, direct questions to the respondents in order to get the in-depth information. In that situation, the interviewer must be careful as well as intelligent. A normal person cannot go as an interviewer. So here, an intelligent person who has knowledge about the subject, so will meet the respondent and collect the in-depth information. Next one is, the respondents sometimes may not understand the questions properly due to disturbance by others. So there are certain situations where when an interviewer asks a question simultaneously to the respondents may not answer or may not understand the questions. So there may be a chances that the respondents may not understand the questions and they may give the wrong answers also. And the next one is, the answers received from the respondents are not thoughtfully given because respondents have no sufficient time to answer the questions. But in case of structured interview, what happens? A number of questions will be given to the respondents and the respondents will be prepared for that question. But this will not happen under unstructured direct interview because the questions is not communicated to the respondents. Simultaneously, the interviewer is going to ask the questions. So, when simultaneous questions are asked to the respondents, in that situation, here the respondents will not have sufficient time to think and answer. So, this also will be a disadvantage. But in case of this structured method, of course, the question will be communicated earlier itself so that here the respondents will think and they will be prepared for those questions. Next one is, many times it is possible to select the wrong respondents, then replies from them is of no use to the researcher. Suppose while selecting the respondents, if the researcher have selected the wrong respondents, in that situation what happens? Whatever the answers or whatever the reply which is given by the respondents, if it is wrong, then of course it affects the research activity. Next one is, this type of interview fails to create economies of scale. So, this is also one of the disadvantage because they cannot reduce the cost. So, or reduce the time, and it also requires more time, and it is this type of interview fails to create economies of scale. So, these are the few disadvantages of unstructured and direct interview. Now, coming to the third type, structured and indirect interview. So, here all the research activity takes place in a structured manner or it in a systematic manner, but the questions what they are going to ask is indirect questions. So, it is called as structured and indirect interview. So, structured and indirect interview is one of the non-discriminatory interview technique. So, this method is what? It is one of the non-discriminatory interview technique. This method avoids biases of the interviewer and the respondents. Among the structured interview, this is the most effective one. So, here it will be in a structured or it will be in a systematic manner, but they are going to ask indirect questions. So, it is not the direct questions like before method, like the method what we have discussed before. So, here the indirect questions are asked to the respondents. In this method, respondents are asked questions indirectly without arranging direct interviews for them. So, what they will do, instead of asking the questions directly, what they are going to do, they are going to ask the indirect questions. So, in this method, respondents are asked questions indirectly without arranging direct interview for them. This method includes all advantages of structured as well as in-depth interview. So, it is a combination of structured as well as indirect interview, because under structured interview it will take place in a systematic manner, whereas indirect question, if they ask indirect question, what happens? They can collect as much information as they want. In the sense, in-depth information can be collected through indirect method. On the one side, it will be in a structured manner or it will be in a systematic manner. On the other side, they can collect as much information as they want. Many times, respondents are not ready to give reasonable answers to direct questions. So, many times, if the researcher asks the respondents directly, then the respondents will not give the answers directly. In that situation, this method is suitable where they can collect lot of information, where the information can be collected in depth. In such cases, they need certain time. Since the questions are arranged, structured, it is possible to classify the responses as they tabulate them for the researcher, because it will be structured, or it will be in the structured format, and the questions will be in a same format, but how they are going to ask will be different. That is, indirect questions will be asked in order to get the answer for that particular question. So, it will be in a proper sequence so that it will be able to create the tabulation form very easily. So, this is about structured and indirect interview. Now, coming to the fourth one, unstructured and indirect interview. So, what do you mean by unstructured? So, it will not be in a systematic manner, at the same time indirect. So, here the questions are asked to the respondents indirectly, not directly. They are going to ask to the respondents indirectly so that in-depth information can be collected. So, structured questions may not adequately reveal the consent and interest of the respondents. So, when the questions are in a structured manner, so it will affect the respondents. In order to remove this drawback, psychologists have advised to hold unstructured and indirect interview for the respondents. So, if that method is affecting the respondent, so the psychologists have suggested to follow unstructured as well as indirect method to collect the data. In this method, respondents are not informed of the purpose of the study. Now, here also, since it is unstructured, so the respondents will not know what is the purpose of the study. At the same time, here the researcher will ask the questions indirectly to the respondents. The respondents are given a description of a situation. Then they will interpret in the way they wish. Now, what they are going to do here? The researcher will give a situation. So, and they tell the respondents to interpret about that situation however they want. So, here what the respondents will do? Respondents will analyze that situation and they will react to that particular research activity as they want. So, they will give the suggestions as they want, because it is an unstructured as well as indirect interview. For this purpose, various projective techniques are used by the researcher. So, there are a number of projective techniques which are used by the researcher in order to go through this unstructured as well as indirect method. This method has certain advantages. Let us see what are the advantages. It is possible to hold in-depth interview, because here a situation will be given to the respondents and the respondents can react to that situation however they want, so that they will get the in-depth interview. Interpretation is unbiased. So, here how they are going to interpret. So, it is not biased in nature. So, they can interpret as they want. It is suitable for exploratory research. So, when the researcher wants to explore a problem, then this type of method is suitable. Now, coming to the disadvantages, let us see what are the limitations here. Although this method has many advantages, it is not free from limitations. These include projective techniques. So, I have told you, in order to go through this method, they want projective techniques. So, projective technique consumes more time, that is, it consumes more time, more cost, more labor, hence this method is not economical. So, when compared to all the three methods, this method is not economical because we need projective techniques. Next one is, it is difficult to select field organizers who can be competitive, intelligent and interested. Now, for whom to select? So, who are the respondents? At the same time, who are the interviewers? Here both has to be very skilled, because it always deals with the unstructured as well as indirect interview. So, a situation has to be analyzed and the respondents have to react on that situation. So, it is difficult to select the field organizers who is competitive, intelligent and interested. Next one is, this will be the problems with propagating, encoding as well as decoding information. Now, like other interview method where the questions are arranged systematically and the answers will be given to that particular questions. But in this case, here no questions will be there. Randomly a situation will be given to the respondents and they will analyze and interpret that situation. In that situation, at the end of the research project, that is we have to prepare a research report where this encoding as well as decoding of that information will be very difficult, because each and every respondents will give their own opinion, they will react according to their wish, so it will be difficult for encoding as well as decoding. So this is a main drawback at the end of the research activity. So these are the drawbacks of this unstructured as well as indirect interview. So in my next session, I am going to discuss about, so we were discussing about communication method. So in today's session, we have discussed about personal interview. In next session, we shall discuss about telephone interview. So how through telephone, how the researcher will collect the information from the respondents. So my dear students, hope you all understood today's session. See you all in my next session with a new topic. Till then, take care. Thank you.